Yesterday my boss literally ran away from work after quitting. What is the strangest way you've seen someone quit? A few years back a guy got dragged out of one of my old employers in cuffs. After being read his rights, he looked right at the horrified owner and said, "Well, I guess I quit." Didn't expect it because he was shirt and tie boring in his 60s. But apparently shirt and tie boring guy was also a wife beater. The boring ones are always the craziest. Two managers, one who looked like Ross Perot and one who looked like John Candy, were leading a beating when police came in and arrested them. Turns out they took a trip together to the next town over and beat her nearly to death. Something planes, trains and automobiles. A guy I knew got an email for a beating in the boss's office. Figuring he was fricked, he starts just destroying computer equipment. Just fricking crap up like crazy. So he goes into the office, sits down, and the boss tells him he needs him to go to a conference someplace, and it'd be all paid for by the company. He didn't get to go to the conference. And this is why companies escort laid off fired employees out the door. My previous company was so awful that we would get new employees sometimes that would get the vibe very quickly and quit within a few days. But the classic was the guy who never came back from his lunch break on the first day. Within his group in our company, his name became a verb meaning to quit at lunch and never come back. So occasionally, you'd hear unfrustrated employees say, "That's it, I'm doing this guy's name." I have two stories, one normal and the other not so normal. The first was a bus buy at Red Lobster that had had enough on a Friday night. He was in the middle of cleaning a table. Nobody was talking to him. Nobody was yelling and nobody had had any confrontation with him all night. Suddenly he stood up, yelled, "Frick this place," took off his apron, threw it across the room, and walked out the door. Never saw him again. The weird one was a guy at a place I worked where we had unlimited internet access. A lot of people would Facebook or whatever. Turns out this guy was trolling chat rooms for underage girls. He left for lunch to meet one at the mall and it wasn't a young girl but a bunch of cops. They took him and then came and took the computer he worked on. My ex-girlfriend used to be a pizza delivery driver for a chain pizzeria. One day her boss was giving her guff and she said she quit. The manager said she needed to bring her uniform in. She promptly took off her shirt, threw it at him, she was wearing a bra, then walked out, through a restaurant full of family's customers. My friend quit his job at a corner store by just walking out and never coming back. Before he left, he stashed an open gallon of milk on top of the radiator that hung from the ceiling. What a sour way to leave. After 25 years as an executive with a fairly large corporation, I threw the keys to my company car and my company credit card on the CEO's desk and walked home. Started my own business 4 months later and just retired after 19 successful and blissful years. A friend of mine had some co-workers in their warehouse that didn't get along. One went home for lunch claiming to get Tylenol for a headache. She came back with a gun, shot her nemesis co-worker in the hip as she walked past, then walked up to her and shot her in the head point blank. This woman then headed to the front office, gave the gun to her boss and said she had shot the co-worker, and quit. She waited around for the police to come get her. There has to be a link for an article on that mess. When I quit my job, I left not angrily, but curtly, solemnly walked out of the office, said goodbyes to my co-workers, and made it 2 steps out the door, congratulating myself on my dignity, until I realized that I left all my groceries in the office fridge, went back and, with as much dignity as I could, collected half a loaf of bread, 2 jars of peanut butter, and 4 older apples. The first department I worked for had an officer who was lazy at best but was mainly just there for a paycheck. His wife had multiple degrees and he often said that he would quit once she found a well-paying job. Apparently she did. One afternoon I was talking to my sergeant when he got a call from this officer. The conversation only lasted about a minute but in that time he managed to pee the sergeant off immensely. He hung up the phone and looked at me and said, "You're not gonna believe this." Turns out the officer got a call from his wife saying she got hired with some university overseas. So he parked his patrol car at a 711, took off his gun belt and badge and threw them in the trunk, then locked the car keys in the trunk with them and called the sergeant and told him where the car was parked. When I worked at Staples, one of the cashiers was removed by police. Apparently she had been ringing up prepaid phone cards, which activates them and then voiding the sales, which fixed the problem of the register being unbalanced. Unfortunately for her, all those voids are tracked, and she just threw the cards away in the trash can. She was something like 16 or 17 years old. She was loading all the minutes onto her phone. She even taught another cashier how to do it. In total, I think she stole somewhere in the neighborhood of $2,000 worth of prepaid phone minutes. Pretty much the drama highlight of my career there. I worked in a crappy call center that paid cash under the table. A guy in his 40s got hired, showed up drunk every day, worked there for 2 weeks, got paid, walked straight out the office while loudly proclaiming, "Alright, I'm outta here. I quit. I'm going to buy coke and bang H now, thanks everybody." I got fired last for criticizing the management of my small kitchen. I was in the manager's tiny office, and when he said the words I stood up, took off my work shirt, and proceeded to let out an excruciatingly long and obnoxiously loud fart. When it petered out, I stood there in silence for about 10 seconds before turning and walking out. One guy I worked with walked into the kitchen, dropped tro, and mooned everyone on the line. I saw what he was doing out of the corner of my eye, so I whipped a green pepper slice at him. He yelled, so I think it hit him somewhere sensitive. For whatever reason, I imagined this as a jovial game of pin the tail on the donkey, but instead of pin it was a ninja style like green pepper slice, and instead of a tail it was rusty, saggy ballsack. I once worked as a fry cook at the only 24-hour diner in Boston. All the other fry cooks were Brazilians who worked ridiculous hours to send money back home. By that I mean, after working the overnight shift on a weekend when every frickin' drunk butt douchebag is 2 feet behind you telling you to make him some frickin' burgers. These guys would then leave that job at 6 AM and go straight to the cleaning offices across town. Anyway, one night Marco is on the phone to his wife in Brazil and they're arguing about something in the most rapid fire Portuguese I've ever heard. He puts down the phone, slowly looks up, pauses, and screams, "I think my wife is cheating on me." Then he pommel horses over the counter, bolts out the door, and is never heard from again. I dream about doing this every day, just standing up and walking out. No harsh words, no cussing, nothing, just jitting up and done with it. The only thing stopping me is my best, only, friend who also works there. Most of the workload would land on his shoulders, and I can't justify doing that. Oh, and the lack of an income with which to pay off my mortgage. That's also kind of important. An apprentice at my work, only there shortly, did not show up one day, which is not unusual for an apprentice. Then on day 2 he called his wife. She said she had no idea where he was. Then on day 5 his wife calls back and apologizes for lying and that he had been in jail the whole time and quit for him. He picked up his toolbox 2 weeks after. Busy Friday night behind the bar, other bartender walks up to me and says he needs a break. Now? I ask. He replies now and forever and leaves. I hired a 22-year-old kid. His first day went really well and everybody liked him. The next morning I got a call from his father who told me our new employee had gone to bed early and never woke up. Some kind of undiagnosed heart condition. A couple of us went to the wake. I lost a friend that way a while back. Oh, I caused one of these once. I was talking with a buddy about a book series we were both reading and the third guy in the room with us was ominously silent. We finally shut the freak up and asked him what was wrong when he'd been silent for far too long. He whirls on us with the crazy eyes going and growls out, You always do that." "Do what?" "Spoilers." He's so mad he's spitting. "You spoil everything. I wanted to read that series but now I can't because spoilers." "Well, sorry, man. You should have told us. But in fairness, those books came out 30 years ago, so the statute of limitations on spoilers is pretty much up." "No, he's breathing really hard like that angry breathing cartoon characters and nerds do. Red-faced and angry hun hun hun. No spoilers. You can't spoil things." Dude, we're not going to stop talking about everything just because one day you might want to read or watch something. But tell us if it's something you're reading or watching now and we'll keep quiet. He gets real quiet for a second as he realizes we are not going to give in on this. In all fairness, He was one of those people that does not want you talking about anything ever because one day he may possibly want to read or watch it and no spoilers, and then he screams and grabs the sides of his head in his hands, stands up, literally runs out the door, and then we hear it fading away into the distance. And we look outside and see he's running out to his car, still screaming, getting in, and driving off. Never saw him again. If I ever find the need to quit a job I don't like, now I know how I'm going to do it. I had a person at my job who wrote a big long email bashing her supervisor, the CEO and another employee, as well as crying about the fact her co-workers never asked her to go to lunch with them. She selected everyone on her personal contact list and the company's directory, including the help desk system. Our system sends an automated response anytime someone opens a new ticket. Between all the people reporting her email, out of office messages, and delivery failures, she crashed our email server and the help desk server. Playing golf with some pals. One of them has to work, calls from a payphone at the course to call in sick, and as he is talking to the boss his name is being paged to get to the tee box. Fired on the spot. Everyone in the deli at this store I worked at talked about the way one guy quit. He was always a weird guy, just kind of odd and would say weird things. Not like he's going to stab me weird, but enough that you just had to laugh at him rather than attempt to understand what he was getting at. One day, he comes down the stairs from the break room office area holding this pair of massive work boots. He holds them up, grinning, and says, "Them's my walk-in shoes." He left and never came back. Former co-worker pushed for a specific DB solution that he knew, made a good business case for it, mentioned his past experience with it, took a year to have the decision go through, got it implemented, running well. All the kinks worked out over multiple long late nights and weekends, but nobody else knew more than the basics on how things worked. His resignation letter had his consulting offer underneath it. We paid. There was a guy at my work who just left a sticky note on his computer that read, "Going camping. Be back in a week." He came back a year later and got his job back. This was sent to the entire company before they could shut down her email access. I just wanted all to know that. Manager fired me today without any reason other than she doesn't feel I'm working out here. After a whole year. Isn't that something? She doesn't know how to run the accounting department. She hurts the department financially with unfound reasonings for a lot of things that go on there. Just in case any of you wondered why we are doing so bad financially as well as management material, she is not or does want to hear anything if it's not her way. I want to thank all of you for your patience and help over the last year and for most in the company. Just a word of advice, like if you don't already know, watch your backs. Comma as well as management material, she is not or does want to hear anything. Look. I had a guy I worked with for about 2 years who was not exactly a great performer. One Friday he got called in and put on the program, basically you have a few months to rectify whatever crap you are doing. Really, it's a heads up that you will be fired and the company is just taking the standard steps to make sure they do it right. The next Monday the guy just never showed up for work. I found out months later that he claimed mental health disability and continued to get paid for 2+ years per company policy. Haha, guess he had the last laugh. My roommate told me about a girl that worked at Barnes & Noble with her. Apparently they always fire people on Friday and the girl in question somehow knew her head was going to be up on the chopping block. So on the day she assumed she was getting fired, she brought a few items with her to help her go out with a bang, so to say. When they called her to the manager's office, she slipped on a pair of designer high heels she'd brought with her and filled her pockets with glitter. Upon being fired and walked out of the store, she turned around in the front of the store, reached in her pockets, and threw glitter everywhere, clicked her heels and ran out of the store. I know what she did was technically wrong because she ruined a lot of books, but if I were to ever go out with a bang, it would be like that. Place I used to work decided to schedule a mandatory meeting for the day after my 21st birthday. I should also mention, this was a weekend day, not one of my regularly scheduled shifts, and the meeting was scheduled to last about a half hour. Also, they decided to schedule this for 8 AM. When people would mention this meeting, I was sure to add a, which I will not be attending. portion to the conversation. So, the day after my 21st birthday day of the mandatory meeting comes. Behold, I am not at said meeting. At about 8:10 am, a call comes in. It goes like this. Hello, hey, Theoarosis Ball. Were you planning on coming to the meeting today? Had I not clearly stated I wouldn't be in today? Yet, but are you coming in or not? I'm gonna go back to sleep. Click, and that was that. I used to work in a kitchen at a locally owned restaurant, and one of the chefs got so fed up with the amount of eggs Benedict he had to make. What did this guy do? He grabbed a big butt steak knife and cut the freaking palm of his hand and swiped it all along all the walls while screaming at the top of his lungs. Then just walked out. Never saw the dude again. Worked at a grocery store for my first job as a cashier. One of the fellow employees hired with me was pretty cool and we got along. Let's call him Tom. After a month of working there, he would always say he is going to quit. It became an everyday thing. So I just took it as that is how he coped with working there. So one busy Saturday morning he is at the register behind me. We bag the groceries ourselves as well. This guy enters Tom's line on with a full cart and 2 kids. The only reason I looked back is because they were being obnoxious and the guy was talking loudly on the phone. Tom tries to be friendly and greet the customer, but the customer just ignored him. He had scanned most of the items and one of the last items was a jug of milk. Now for some reason we are supposed to offer bags for milk jugs even though they have handles on them. Tom asks the customer, would you like your milk in a bag, sir? Sir. Customer. Still on the phone. What? Yes. God dang it. Can't you see I am on the phone? So rude. I look back from overhearing that and I can see Tom trying not to seem angry, but I was helping my own customer. Tom says okay with a forced smile, takes the milk jug, opens it, pours it all into a bag, and presents it to the customer. The customer is startled and says, what the frick is this? Tom, your milk. You said you wanted it in bag. The customer looked dumbfounded and started yelling. Tom just dropped the bag, spilling milk all over the counter, floor, and customer. Tom just turned and walked out, never to be seen again at the store. Pretty awesome way to quit if you asked me. Bad thing is I had to clean up the milk and deal with the rest of the angry customers' items. My manager didn't believe the story and we had a nice laugh about it once the guy left. I had a friend years ago who was a master at manipulating the unemployment welfare system. Once, he hatched a plan to work at a local factory, which was famous for quick firings for any infraction. Just long enough to qualify for unemployment, and then get fired. He diligently did just enough work to get by for a year, long enough to qualify for unemployment. After that, he simply stopped working. He'd show up, but he wouldn't do anything. His line would just back up until they pulled somebody over to cover for him. After a few days of that, he was predictably fired. On his way out, he was directed to HR, where he was asked to sign some papers saying that he had been fired and wasn't to return. He smugly signed and walked out the door. Upon applying for his hard-earned unemployment, he learned that one of the documents that he had signed indicated that he was, in fact, resigning by his own choice, and thus not entitled to any unemployment benefit. TLDR. A guy spends a year trying to get unemployment, but is too stupid to get fired. We once fired a weird guy from the cubicles and he sent the entire company an email, I have a surprise for you all tomorrow. He showed up the next day after he was let go wearing a trench coat and black shades. He walked into the office and pulled 2 fully loaded, semi-automatic squirt guns out from under his coat and he soaked the entire staff. He emptied both clips and as he turned to leave he stopped to say surprise. He later went on to become a nobody. This must have been years ago. There's no chance he doesn't get arrested shot in this day and age. In a kitchen I worked at, some guy went ape crap. It was his last day before he retired. He was a mild-mannered Jehovah's Witness, and something in him just snapped. He started throwing pots and pans, threatened to come back and wreak havoc, yelled a lot, and eventually stormed out of work after calling us all sinners. I used to work for a group home, and I had filled out my 2 weeks notice, but hadn't intended to fax it right away. One of my co-workers, I found out later, thought they were doing me a solid because they knew how much I wanted out and faxed it, thinking it had gotten lost in the glut of paperwork that accompanies a group home. I called the main office to inquire about getting a shift covered. The people in the office had me on speakerphone, and when I told them that I wasn't the one who faxed it in, they told me that it didn't matter because I intended to quit, and my position had been filled. It hadn't. Then when I tried to explain, I had 4 people from 4 different departments laughing at me on the phone, and I exploded. Over time, 3 years with the company, I had accumulated a fair amount of dirty laundry, nothing illegal, but some who slept whose wife and all that. I laid all of it out, and ended it with a frick off and frick you. I work at a corporate headquarters of a company with a lot of offices in the field all over the country US. An employee at one of the field offices felt that it was appropriate to email a nasty letter of resignation to the entire company. You could hear the gasps throughout the otherwise quiet office as people began to read it, then followed by laughter. It was funny at first, but since I handle employment issues at the company, I had to contact the head of IT ASAP to have the email recalled. It was a mess at first, but pretty funny after the fact. We found out that she left the office in a hurry and no one knew why until the email popped up. She must have hit send then left right away. For my first couple of weeks working as an apprentice engineer, I was placed with an older chap called Petty to be shown the ropes around the workshop. Nice enough old timer. Had been around the block a few times and had a fondness for tea. Sadly, work started to slow up and I was told they were going to fire Petty the very next Friday. So Friday comes and we all get our paychecks in the morning, and while we're chatting away in the canteen, then we look out the window to see Petty jump the fence at the bottom of the yard and run off across the fields and never be seen again. Godspeed, Petty. Godspeed, wherever you are. One of the programmers I used to work with left one morning without warning. He looked up at the ceiling and screamed a deep and really hurt sounding scream for 10 seconds. Got up and walked out the door, out of the office and out towards the freeway. Somebody saw him later that evening walking about 20 miles from our office. He was never seen again by us. He never came back and got his car or any of his stuff. I took his keyboard. I didn't get to see it myself, but I was working at an auto body shop. We had a painter named Dave. Dave had just been rehired after being fired quit earlier that month. Apparently Dave got into an argument with our manager Mike. The argument got so intense that Mike went in his office and got his gun. Dave didn't give a crap and started calling Mike a freaking P and grabbed a chain. He chased Mike all around the parking lot waving the chain over his head like a lasso. Fortunately no one got hurt. 2 weeks later Dave called back and asked for his job. Seeing he was a really good painter, Mike rehired him. I learned about the story when I asked why Dave was always mean mugging Mike and would call him a P behind his back. Also I wondered why everyone thought Dave was such a bad butt. TLDR. A coworker attacked our manager with a chain after the manager got his gun over a petty argument. An ex-coworker of mine decided to go for a nature walk for 3 hours during the busiest hours of the morning at a university coffee shop I used to work at. It was hectic. The line was out the door. He came in for his shift and started taking orders for 5 minutes. After that he said was going for a walk and never came back. Later we found out that he was tripping on a buffet of hallucinogens. When he did come back, he showed up in his boxers and muddy socks. Turns out he went for a dip in a turtle pond to make friendly conversations with his shelled friends about how he was going to quit his job. I worked in a restaurant and one day the pastry cook in charge of making the pastries made 15 lemon meringue pie, 12 over the usual par, and when the chef confronted him later he proceeded to pick one up, throw it into his face, then turn around and start a massive lemon meringue pie food fight. He then asked one of the servers to take a picture of all of them with his phone, then walked out through the restaurant saying peace out B and left XD. It was best shift I've ever worked in my life. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.